"Give me the child, Elena. She belongs to us now." Those were the words a man spoke, softly, at a christening in a white stone church above the sea, and the woman he spoke them to went very still, holding her little girl against her heart, and understood in that single moment that she was going to have to do the most dangerous thing a woman in that town could ever do. She was going to have to say no. Stay with me, my friend, because you have never heard a story quite like this one. It is a story about a mother who was told, all her life, that she did not matter, that her voice was small, that her thoughts were her own affair and no one else's, that she was there to be looked at and married off and kept quiet. And it is the story of how that very belief, held by the most feared men in the whole region, turned out to be the crack that brought their house down. This is a story that will make you look at the quiet women in your own life a little differently. So settle in. Let me take you to the town first. It was called Murano, and it clung to a hillside on the far southern coast of Italy, where the mountains came down almost to the water, and the old stone houses stacked themselves one above another, like something built by patient hands over 1,000 years. From a distance, in the golden evening light, Murano looked like a postcard, like a place where nothing bad could ever happen. The bells rang for mass. The old men played cards in the square. The lemon trees grew heavy and the sea shone. But every town keeps its secrets, and Murano kept a very old and very heavy one. For as long as anyone living could remember, the town had belonged, not on any map, not in any law book, but truly belonged, to a brotherhood of men who called themselves simply the Society. They were not loud about it. That was the first thing outsiders never understood. The men of the Society did not swagger. They ran the olive presses and the shipping and the building trades. They sat in the front pews at church. They gave money for the festival and the school roof. And underneath all of it, quietly, they ran everything else too. Through fear, through favors, and above all through silence. In Murano, silence was the law that mattered most. A man who broke it did not come home. And everyone knew it, and so no one broke it, and the years went by. The woman holding her child that day at the christening was named Elena Bruno. She was 31 years old, and she had been born into the town and married into the Society, and she had learned its silence the way a child learns to breathe. The little girl in her arms was her daughter, Sophia, 10 years old, dark-eyed and watchful and quick, with a way of humming to herself when she thought no one was listening. Sophia was the whole of Elena's heart, and the man who had leaned close and murmured those words, "She belongs to us now," was Elena's father-in-law, the head of the family, and, though the word was never spoken aloud, the head of the whole society in Murano. His name was Don Ludovico Bruno. He was not threatening her, not exactly. He was smiling. He was simply telling her, the way you tell someone the weather, how the world was arranged. The girl was 10. In a few short years there would be a marriage arranged, a boy from another society family, an alliance sealed. That was how it had always been done. That was how Elena herself had been given, once, to Don Ludovico's son. It was simply Sophia's turn to begin belonging to the men. Elena said nothing. She had learned that too. But something behind her calm face had just quietly come awake, something that would not go back to sleep. For Elena had begun, in the last year, to notice things. She had noticed how the light went out of the women in that town as they aged, how the girls who laughed and ran became wives who kept their eyes down. She had noticed that her own husband, Marco, whom she had loved once with her whole young heart, had been lost to that life years before, and had gone out one night and not come home, and that no one had ever told her the truth of it, and that she had never once been permitted to ask. She had noticed that in Murano, a woman was expected to grieve quietly, obey quietly, and disappear quietly. And now they wanted Sophia. That night, when the christening was over and the house was dark, Elena sat on the edge of her daughter's bed and watched the child sleep. One small hand curled beneath her cheek, and she made a decision that would have frightened the bravest man in Murano. She decided that her daughter was not going to disappear. She did not yet know how. She had no money of her own, no passport she could reach, no friend she could fully trust, and nowhere in the whole world to run. She had only the decision itself, small and hard and bright as a coal. She sat there a long while in the dark, listening to the old house settle around her, and she let herself remember the girl she had been at Sophia's age, how she had once run down to the harbor to watch the boats come in, how she had believed, in the plain, unquestioning way of children, that her life would be her own to live. She remembered when she had stopped believing that, though she could not name the exact day. It had happened slowly, the way the tide comes in, so gradual that you never see the water move, and then all at once the beach is gone. She would not let that same tide take her daughter. Whatever it cost, she would hold the line where she herself had failed to hold it. But every great change in this world begins exactly there, my friend, with one quiet person deciding, in the dark, that things will not go on as they have. Remember Elena's face in that lamplight. Remember the sleeping child. Because the men of the society had made one great mistake over all their long and careful years, and they did not even know they had made it. They had never once thought to be afraid of their own women. To understand what Elena did next, you have to understand the world she was trying to leave, and how tightly it had once held her. She had not always been a frightened woman keeping her eyes down. As a girl, Elena had been the brightest in her class at the little school in Murano. She had loved books, and the sea, and the idea, half-formed, the way such ideas are in the young, that the world was very large and that she might one day see some of it. Her teacher had said she could go to the university in the city if she wished. Her mother had smiled at that and said nothing, because her mother knew, as all the women of Murano knew, how these things really went. When Elena was 19, Marco Bruno began to wait for her outside the church. Marco was handsome and warm and full of laughter in those days, and he was the son of the most powerful man in town, and when he looked at Elena she felt, for the first time in her life, entirely seen. She did not think then about what his family was, or rather she knew and did not let herself know, the way a whole town can know a thing and never say it. Within a year they were married. Within 2, Sophia was born, and somewhere in those same years, quietly, the laughter went out of Marco. For the life claimed him, as it claimed all its sons. He began to keep late hours and hard silences. He began to carry a weight he would not set down and would not share. And the young man who had once made Elena feel seen became a man who looked through her. Because in the world of the society, a wife was not someone you confided in. A wife was someone you protected by telling her nothing, and controlled, in the same breath, by telling her nothing. Knowledge was the men's, silence was the women's. That was the arrangement, old as the hills. Then came the night Marco went out and did not return. No one told Elena what had happened. She was given a black dress and a place at the front of the church and the sympathy of the whole town, and she was made to understand, without a single word being spoken plainly, that she was never to ask. So she did not ask. She was 26 years old, a widow, with a small daughter, and no life of her own that anyone had ever thought to let her have. She belonged, now, to her father-in-law's house. And here is the thing I most want you to see, my friend, because it is the whole heart of this story. In that house, and in that town, and across the whole reach of the society, the women were everywhere and counted for nothing. They cooked the feasts and raised the children and carried the messages and kept the accounts in their heads and held the family's secrets more faithfully than any locked box. They were the memory of the whole organization. They knew who had done what and when and to whom. They knew where things were kept and where the money moved, and which quiet grave held which quiet answer. And not one of the men ever imagined that any of this mattered, because the women, to them, were furniture. Beautiful furniture, cared-for furniture, but furniture. You do not fear your table. You do not wonder what your chair is thinking. The men of the society had built their whole invisible kingdom on the certainty that their women would always, always keep silent. For generations they had been right. Elena, in the long gray years of her widowhood, came slowly to understand all of this, not as an idea, but as the very air she breathed. She watched Don Ludovico receive his sons and his captains in the front room, watched them plan and boast and decide the fates of families over glasses of wine, and she watched them fall silent and smile whenever she entered with the coffee, as though a clock had walked into the room. She saw that they trusted her completely, precisely because they did not see her at all. She began, without quite deciding to listen. It shames me a little to tell you how easy it was, my friend. Because the ease of it is the whole tragedy. No one ever guarded their words around Elena. Why would they? She was only the woman who brought the coffee, only the widow who kept the house, only a pair of hands and a bowed head. Grown men who would have gone to their graves before whispering a single secret to a stranger, spoke freely across the supper table, while she cleared the plates, as though she were no more present than the salt cellar. And so, night after night, year after year, the whole quiet machinery of the society passed through the room where Elena worked, and settled, unnoticed, into the one place none of them ever thought to search, the memory of a woman they had trained themselves not to see. She was not planning anything, not then. She told herself she was only paying attention, the way a person pays attention to the weather they must live in. But she found she remembered everything she heard, the names, the debts, the quiet arrangements. It all settled into her mind and stayed there, filed away in the dark, gathering. And then Sofia turned 10, and Don Ludovico smiled at a christening and said she belongs to us now. And all at once everything Elena had been quietly gathering had a purpose. She would not raise her daughter to become furniture. She would not watch the light go out of Sofia the way it had gone out of every woman she had ever loved. Whatever it cost her, and she suspected it would cost her everything, she was going to get her daughter out. She just had to find the one person in the world who would listen to a woman the society had taught the whole world to ignore. 60 miles up the coast, in the gray stone courthouse of a busy city, there was a woman who had spent 7 years of her life trying to break the society, and failing. Her name was Chiara Ferrante, and she was a prosecutor. She was in her middle 40s, small and plain and precise. With reading glasses she was forever losing, and a stubbornness that had worn out 3 superiors. She came from the South herself, from a town not so different from Murano, and she had gone into the law for one reason, because she had grown up watching the men of the society take whatever they wanted, and had promised herself, as a girl, that one day she would find the thing that could stop them. For 7 years, she had not found it. She had tried everything the law knew how to try. She had chased the money, and the money vanished into 100 honest-looking businesses. She had turned informers among the men, and the informers were found out, or lost their nerve, or simply disappeared back into the silence. She had tapped the phones and watched the houses and built her careful cases, and again the cases had collapsed, because in the end there was always the same wall, and the wall was silence. The society did not talk. Fathers did not talk. Sons did not talk. Captains went to prison for 20 years rather than say one word, and were honored for it. You cannot convict a wall. Chiara had very nearly given up. And then one gray afternoon, going back over an old case for the 3rd or 4th time, she noticed something she had been looking straight through for 7 years. She was reading the transcript of a wiretap, the men of a society family, planning, boasting, deciding. And in the margin of the transcript, a junior officer had noted the sounds in the background of the recording. A woman enters, serves coffee. The men pause, the woman leaves, the men resume. Chiara read that little note, and she took off her reading glasses, and she sat back in her chair, and something opened in her mind like a window thrown wide. The woman had been in the room. For 7 years, Chiara had been trying to get inside the minds of the men, and it could not be done, because the men had been raised from birth to reveal nothing. But the women were in every room. The women heard everything, held everything, remembered everything. The women were the great uncounted memory of the entire society, and the men, in their pride, had never once thought to fear them. The men had built the whole edifice of their power on the certainty that their women did not matter and would never speak. That, Chiara realized, her heart beginning to pound, is not their strength. That is the flaw at the very foundation of the house. That is the crack that runs all the way to the bottom. They despised their women, and so they had left, standing in every kitchen and at every graveside, an army of witnesses they had trained themselves never to see. Chiara sat with that thought until the light failed outside her window, and the office grew dark around her, and she did not turn on the lamp. She was thinking of her own grandmother, a woman from a society town who had lived and died without once being asked her opinion on anything that mattered, and who had known, Chiara felt certain, a great many things she had carried silently to the grave. She was thinking of all the women like her grandmother, a whole silent generation of them, keepers of a history no one had ever bothered to read. For 7 years, Kiara had been trying to force open a locked door, and all that time she realized now there had been 100 windows standing quietly open, and she had simply never thought to look at them, because she had been taught, like everyone else, that what came through a kitchen window did not count. But there was a terrible catch, and Kiara understood it at once. A woman who came forward would be giving up everything, her home, her name, her family, the only world she had ever known, and any protection that world had ever given her. She would be utterly alone. No amount of legal cleverness could make that easy. The law could offer such a woman a new life somewhere far away, a new name, safety of a kind. But it could not give her back what she would lose. It could only promise her that her children might grow up free. Kiara knew that no ordinary appeal would ever be enough to ask that of anyone. It would take a woman who already had a reason vast enough to outweigh everything she owned. It would take, though Kiara did not yet know her name, a mother who had just been told that her daughter belonged to the men. Kiara put her glasses back on, pulled a fresh legal pad toward her, and at the top of it she wrote a single line that would guide the rest of her life's work. They never listened to their women, so the women are the only ones who can end them. Then she began, quietly and carefully, to make herself known, through a trusted priest here, a school teacher there, a doctor, a midwife, to the women of the society towns, not with promises, not with pressure, only with a message, passed hand to hand through people who could be trusted, so soft it was almost nothing at all. If ever you decide you want a different life for your children, there is someone who will listen. The message reached Murano the way water reaches the sea, slowly, quietly, finding every low and hidden path. It came, in the end, through Father Antonio, the old parish priest who had baptized Sophia and had buried more good people than he cared to count. Father Antonio was not a brave man by nature, and he was careful, for he knew exactly what town he lived in, but he had spent 40 years watching the women of Murano carry their sorrows to his confessional, and somewhere in those 40 years his heart had quietly broken over them, one by one. So when a message came to him from a prosecutor in the city, passed through a fellow priest he trusted with his soul, a message that asked nothing except that he let certain women know they were not entirely without a friend, Father Antonio prayed over it for 3 nights, and then he began, very cautiously, to pass it on. He did not speak it aloud, even in the confessional. He was not a fool. Instead, to the few women he judged might one day need it, he found small ways, a number, written tiny on the corner of a holy card, a name, murmured once and never repeated, a quiet sentence that could mean nothing or everything. If you are ever in real trouble, my child, there is more help in this world than you have been told. For a long time, none of the women did anything at all. Of course they didn't. To reach out was unthinkable. The message settled among them like a seed under winter ground, and waited. Then, on a spring afternoon, Elena Bruno came to see Father Antonio about the flowers for the festival, and stayed, after the others had gone, to help him fold the altar cloths. And in the quiet of the empty church, without looking up from the linen in her hands, she said, "Father, that thing you once told me, about there being more help in the world, did you mean it?" The old priest's hands went still. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her, in the softest voice, everything he knew, which was not much, only that there was a woman, a prosecutor, in the city, who believed that the women of the society mattered, and who would truly listen, and who could, perhaps, help a person begin again, somewhere far away. He told her the cost, as honestly as he understood it, that such a step could never be undone, that she could never come home, that she would be, for the rest of her life, a woman who had broken the one law that could not be broken. Elena folded the last altar cloth very carefully, and smoothed it, and set it down. "They want to give Sophia away, Father," she said. "In a few years, to seal a bargain, the way they gave me." She lifted her eyes at last, and there was something in them the old priest had never seen there before. "I would rather lose everything I have than watch her light go out. I have already watched it happen to every woman I ever loved. I will not watch it happen to my daughter." Father Antonio, who had buried so many, and comforted so many, and been able to save so very few, felt something turn over in his old heart. He reached into his cassock and drew out a holy card, a plain little picture of a saint, and on the back of it, in tiny letters, was written a telephone number. "Then when you are ready," he said, "and only you can know when that is, you call this number from somewhere that is not your home, and you ask for Chiara, not before you are certain, because once you begin, my child, you cannot stop." Elena took the card. She slid it into the hem of her sleeve, where a woman's small secret things can hide, and she thanked the old priest for the flowers, as though nothing at all had passed between them, and she walked back up through the crooked streets of Murano in the spring light, past the men playing cards in the square, past the lemon trees, past the sea shining below, carrying in her sleeve the most dangerous thing in the whole town. She did not call the number that day, or the next week, or even the next month. She was not reckless. She was a mother, and mother's plan. She went on cooking the feasts and serving the coffee, and keeping her eyes down, and all the while, behind her calm face, she was watching, listening, remembering, and getting ready. She learned Don Ludovico's habits. She learned when the house was watched and when it was not. She learned where Sophia's papers were kept. And she studied her daughter, in those weeks, more closely than she ever had before, as though trying to memorize her, the way you memorize a face before a long parting. She watched Sophia at her sums, and at her games, and asleep in the lamplight, and she saw in her all the brightness she herself had once had and lost. She saw a child who still asked questions, who still expected answers, who did not yet know that the world she was born into had already decided her whole life for her. And every time Elena looked at that bright, unafraid face, her resolve grew a little harder and a little quieter, until it stopped feeling like fear at all, and began to feel simply like the next thing she had to do. And she waited for the moment when the fear of leaving finally grew smaller than the fear of staying. That moment came sooner than she thought, and it came, as such moments so often do, through the child. It was an ordinary evening, and that was what made it so terrible. Elena was in the kitchen, and Sophia was at the table doing her sums by lamplight, humming her little tune. Don Ludovico had guests in the front room, men's low voices, the clink of glasses, the ordinary music of the house, and Sophia, without looking up from her sums, said a thing that stopped Elena's heart. She said it lightly, the way children repeat things they have overheard without understanding them. She said, "Mama, Nano says when I'm older I'll marry Tommaso Ferro, and then our family and his family will be friends forever, and I mustn't make a fuss because a good girl never makes a fuss." She wrote another number in her copybook. "Tommaso pulls the cat's tail, but Nano says it doesn't matter what I think of him." She hummed a little. "Nano says it never matters what a girl thinks. It never matters what a girl thinks." Elena stood very still at the stove, and she felt the whole long silence of her own life rise up in her throat. She was looking at her bright, quick, humming daughter, 10 years old, already being taught, gently, lovingly, by a grandfather who believed he was doing right, the very lesson that had taken the light out of every woman Elena had ever known. It never matters what a girl thinks, and she understood that if she did nothing, if she stayed and kept her eyes down and served the coffee, then in a few short years the humming would stop, and the light would go out of Sophia too, and Elena would have watched it happen and let it happen, and she would never forgive herself, not in this life or any other. That was the night the fear of leaving finally grew smaller than the fear of staying. 2 days later, on a pretext of taking Sophia to the doctor in a nearby town, Elena walked into a post office far from Murano, and from a telephone there, with her heart going like a drum, she dialed the number written on the back of the holy card, and when a calm woman's voice answered, she said the words she had rehearsed 100 times in the dark. "My name is Elena. Father Antonio said you would listen." And Chiara Ferrante, 60 miles away in her gray office, set down her pen and listened. They spoke only a few minutes that first time. Chiara did not push. She did not make grand promises. She asked Elena's daughter's name and her age, and she listened to the fear in Elena's voice, and then she said something that Elena would remember for the rest of her days. She said, "Signora, I want you to understand something before you decide anything at all. What those men have done, all these years, is teach you that you do not matter. It is the foundation their whole house is built on, and it is a lie. You have been in every room. You have heard everything. You matter more than any of them has ever dared to imagine, and that is exactly why they should be afraid of you, and not the other way around. But I will not pretend this is easy. If you come to us, you will lose your home and your name and the only world you know. I can offer you and your girl safety and a new life, far from here. I cannot offer you an easy one, only a free one. Think carefully, and when you are certain, call me again. Elena took her daughter home to Murano, and she served the coffee, and she kept her eyes down, and she thought carefully, as she had been told, for 11 days. On the 12th day, she called again, and she said, I am certain. And so it began. The most dangerous thing a woman in that town could do. Over the following weeks, in stolen moments, through the careful chain of the priest and a trusted doctor, and at last a plain, unmarked car on a road outside town, Elena began, quietly, to give Chiara Ferrante what no wall of men had ever given her in 7 years. Not gossip, not guesses. The true and ordered memory of everything she had heard while pouring the coffee, the names, the arrangements, the quiet answers to old questions, all of it filed carefully in the mind of a woman the men had never once thought to see. She was terrified every single day, but every night she sat on the edge of Sophia's bed and watched her daughter sleep, one small hand curled beneath her cheek, and she found her courage again in the morning. There were moments, in those weeks, when the fear nearly won. Once Don Ludovico looked at her across the supper table a beat longer than usual, and Elena was certain, in a cold rush, that he knew everything. And then he only asked her to pass the bread, and she passed it with a steady hand, and the moment went by. Another time, a car she did not recognize sat parked at the end of the lane for the better part of an afternoon, and she watched it from behind the curtain with her heart in her throat, until it finally drove away, some cousin's visitor after all. She learned, in those weeks, a thing that every quietly brave person eventually learns, that courage is not a feeling you wait to arrive. It is a decision you make again each morning, before the feeling has any say in the matter. And each morning, looking at her daughter, Elena made it again. There is a kind of courage, my friend, that has nothing to do with weapons or shouting, or the things men call brave. It is the courage of a mother who packs one small bag in the middle of the night and wakes her sleeping child with a finger to her lips and walks out the door of the only home she has ever known, into the dark, with nothing but a decision and a stranger's promise. That was the courage Elena Bruno needed on the night she left Murano. It had to be done all at once, and it had to be done perfectly, because there would be no second chance. Chiara had explained it plainly. The moment the society understood that Elena had been talking, she would be in real danger, and so would Sophia. The only safety was to be gone, truly gone, out of the region entirely, into the care of the authorities, before anyone knew a thing. And so a night was chosen, and a signal was arranged, and Elena spent the last ordinary evening of her old life, serving Don Ludovico his supper, and wishing him good night, and kissing his rough cheek, knowing she would never see him again, feeling nothing she could afford to feel. At 2 in the morning, when the house was dark and silent, she woke her daughter. "Sophia," she whispered, "wake up, my love. We are going on a journey. You must be very quiet, quieter than you have ever been, and you must trust your mama." "Can you do that?" Sophia, 10 years old and half asleep and frightened, looked up at her mother's face in the dark, and whatever she saw there, she trusted it. She nodded. She did not cry out. She let her mother dress her, and she took her mother's hand, and the two of them went down the stairs of the sleeping house, one careful step at a time, past the room where Don Ludovico slept, past the front room still smelling of the men's cigars, and out into the cold spring night. I will not pretend it was not frightening. It was. They walked down through the crooked black streets of Murano with their hearts in their mouths, keeping to the shadows, and once a dog barked and they froze against a wall for a full minute that felt like an hour, and once a light came on in an upstairs window and they waited, not breathing, until it went out again. Elena knew the town watched itself. She knew that a single wrong pair of eyes at a single window could end everything. She held her daughter's hand and prayed, silently, to every saint Father Antonio had ever named. At the bottom of the town, on the coast road, in the deeper dark beyond the last streetlight, a plain car was waiting with its engine off. A woman got out of it, small, plain, in reading glasses, though it was 2 a.m, and came forward quietly, and Elena knew her at once, though they had never met, because there is a way that one determined woman recognizes another. "Signora Bruno," Chiara Ferrante said softly. "You came." There was something like wonder in her voice, even after all her years. "You actually came." "You said you would listen," Elena whispered. "No one has ever said that to me before." Chiara looked down at the child, at Sophia clutching her mother's hand and her one small bag, and something moved across the prosecutor's plain face. The memory, perhaps, of a girl she herself had once been, in a town not so different, long ago. "Get in," she said gently. "Both of you." "Quickly now. We have a long way to go before morning, and there are good people waiting for you at the end of it. You are not alone anymore. Do you hear me? From this moment on, you are not alone." Elena lifted Sophia into the car, and climbed in after her, and pulled the door shut as quietly as she could. The engine started, and as the plain, unremarkable car pulled away along the dark coast road, Elena Bruno turned once to look back at Murano, at the stacked stone houses climbing the black hillside, at the little white church above the sea, at the only world she had ever known, growing smaller and smaller behind her. Then she turned around and faced forward, and did not look back again. Somewhere along that dark road, an hour or 2 into the drive, Sophia fell asleep at last against her mother's side, worn out by fear and the strangeness of the night. Elena sat very still so as not to wake her, one arm around the sleeping child, watching the black country slide past the window. The olive groves, the sleeping villages, the far occasional light of a house where some other family lived, some other life. She did not weep. She had passed beyond weeping into a great clear quiet, the quiet that comes to people who have finally, after long dread, begun to do the thing they were most afraid of. She thought of Father Antonio, who had given her the number, and would now have to live out his days in a town that must never suspect him. She thought of Marco, and of the young laughing man he had been before the life took him, and she said a silent goodbye to that young man, whom she had loved, and who was long gone. Then she looked down at her daughter, and she thought of nothing at all but the warm weight of her, and the miles going by, and the morning that was coming. You may think the hardest part was the leaving. It was not. The hardest part came in the gray months that followed, in a safe and secret place far to the north, where Elena and Sophia lived under a name that was not their own, and where Elena did the thing that no man of the society had ever done in all its long history. She told the truth, out loud, on the record, completely. It took weeks, day after day, in a plain room, with Chiara Ferrante beside her. Elena gave her testimony, everything she had gathered in all those silent years of pouring the coffee. She was patient and exact. She did not exaggerate, and she did not guess. She simply remembered, with the deep and faithful memory of a woman who had been in every room precisely because no one thought she counted. And slowly, as her words were checked against the records and the wiretaps and the 7 years of Chiara's patient failures, something extraordinary began to happen. The wall began to come down. Names that had never been proven were proven. Arrangements that had always been suspected were confirmed. Quiet old questions finally had their quiet answers. And the great structure of silence that the men of the society had built over generations, the wall that no prosecutor had ever been able to breach, was brought down not by an army, not by a raid, not by another hard, silent man turning informer, but by one ordinary mother who had decided her daughter would not be furniture. And here, my friend, is the part of the story I most want you to carry away with you. When the arrests finally came, and the men of the society were brought at last into the gray courtrooms of the city, the thing they could not understand, the thing that seemed to bewilder them more than the handcuffs, more than the years ahead, was how they had been so careful. They had trusted no outsider. They had raised their sons from the cradle to reveal nothing. Where had the crack been? Who had betrayed them? It never occurred to most of them, even then, to think of the women. Even in ruin, they could not quite imagine it. They had spent their whole lives certain that their wives and mothers and daughters did not matter, did not think, did not count, and that certainty had been the very hole in the wall through which the truth had finally walked out. Chiara Ferrante had been right. The contempt those men held for their own women had not been their strength. It had been, all along, the deepest flaw in the foundation of everything they built. And once one woman had shown that the wall could be breached, once one mother had walked out into the dark and lived, others found their courage too. In the months and years that followed, quietly, one after another, more women came forward, each one a little less afraid, because Elena had gone first. What had held for 100 years began, at last, to change. It cost Elena more than I can easily tell you. She could never go home. She grieved, in the night, for the town on the hillside and the church above the sea, for the good things tangled up with the terrible ones, for the girl she had been and the life she had never been allowed to have. That grief never entirely left her. Courage is not the absence of loss, my friend. Very often it is the willingness to bear the loss for the sake of someone you love more than your own comfort. There were hard nights in that secret place, especially at the beginning, when the strangeness of it all pressed down on her, and she wondered whether she had done a terrible thing. Sophia missed her friends, and her school, and the only streets she had ever known, and she asked, in the way children do, when they were going home. And Elena had to find gentle answers that were not quite the truth, and not quite a lie. Those were the nights that tested her most, not the danger, but the doubt. And on those nights, Chiara Ferrante, who might easily have treated Elena as merely a witness, a means to an end, instead sat with her, and made her tea, and reminded her, quietly, and without ever tiring of it, that what she had done was not a betrayal, but a rescue, that a woman who breaks a wicked silence to save her child has not broken faith with anything worth keeping. But when Elena sat, in the evenings, in that far northern place and watched her daughter, safe, unwatched and free, she knew, beyond any doubt, that she had chosen rightly, because Sophia was still humming. That small sound became, for Elena, the whole measure of whether it had been worth it. In the old house in Murano, in the last year before they left, the humming had grown rarer and rarer, though Elena had hardly noticed at the time, the way you fail to notice a candle guttering until the moment it goes dark. A child feels the weight of a fearful house, even when no one tells her a thing, and Sophia had been growing quieter, folding herself smaller, learning without being taught to take up less room in the world. But in the safe place, week by week, the humming came back. It came back at her sums, and over her drawings, and in the little garden behind the house, until it was simply there again, all day long, the ordinary music of a child who has stopped being afraid. Elena would hear it drifting through the rooms and have to stop whatever she was doing, and stand still, and be grateful, because that sound was the sound of her daughter's light, and it had not gone out after all. The light had not gone out. It was not going to go out, and that, to Elena Bruno, was worth every single thing it had cost. Years passed, the way years do, in a bright, ordinary town, far from the southern coast, a town with no secrets on its hillside, and no silence in its streets. A young woman named Sophia grew up. She was quick and bright and unafraid, and she laughed out loud whenever she pleased, and she said exactly what she thought, because no one had ever taught her not to. She knew, in a general way, that her mother had done something very brave when she was small, and had given up a great deal so that the two of them could live free. She did not know all of it. Elena had decided, wisely, that the whole heavy weight of that old world was not a thing to load onto a child's back. Time enough for the full story when Sophia was grown. For now, it was enough that she was free. Elena herself grew older in that quiet place. She never remarried, and she never went back, and she never once regretted what she had done, though she carried her losses gently all her life, the way we all learn to carry the things we cannot set down. She took work in a little shop. She kept a few plants on the windowsill. She made a small, good, ordinary life out of the freedom she had paid so dearly for, and she was, in her quiet way, content. And far to the south, Chiara Ferrante went on with her life's work. for it turned out that Elena had only been the beginning. The prosecutor's great insight, the one she had written at the top of a legal pad in a moment of clarity years before, proved truer than even she had hoped. They never listened to their women, so the women are the only ones who can end them. One by one, more mothers found their courage. One by one, the walls of silence that had stood for a century began to come down. It was slow, and it was hard, and it was not finished in a day. The things most worth doing rarely are, but it had begun, and it had begun because one ordinary woman, in one small town, had decided that her daughter's light would not go out. Here, at the very end, is what this old story asks of each of us. We are taught, so often, to look for strength in the loud places, in the powerful, the feared, the ones who sit at the head of the table and decide the fates of others. But the truest strength in this world is very often the quietest. It lives in the people no one bothers to notice, the ones who serve the coffee, who fold the linens, who watch and listen and remember, who are told all their lives that they do not matter, and who discover, in the hour of their choosing, that they matter more than anyone ever dared to see. The men of the society built a kingdom of fear that stood for 100 years, and they lost it in the end to the one force they had never thought to guard against, the courage of a mother who loved her child more than she feared them. Think of that the next time you are tempted to measure a person's worth by how much noise they make in the world. The loudest voice in any room is very rarely the strongest. Real strength tends to keep quiet. It does its work early and late, out of the light, asking for nothing. It waits, and watches, and endures a great deal without complaint. And then, on the one day when everything depends on it, it stands up, and it does not bend, and it changes the course of things forever. That was Elena Bruno, and I promise you, my friend, there are people exactly like her in your own life right now. Patient, overlooked, underestimated, carrying more strength behind their quiet faces than anyone around them has ever guessed. Never make the mistake those men made, my friend. Never look through the quiet ones, for the person you have been taught to overlook may be carrying, behind a calm and patient face, the very strength that will one day change everything. And sometimes the woman they never listened to turns out to be the only one who can finally set them all free.